All right. Well, welcome to the Conversation Factory, Rebecca. Pete, thanks for making time out of your busy tour schedule.
Yes, glad to be here. Looking
So
forward
glad to
to
be here.
chatting.
Thank you.
So I want to start way back. Rebecca, what was it like growing up with Pete?
Yeah, so Pete did not come into our family's life until I was 7 years old. So I was an only child until the age of 7.
And then everything was ruined.
I've heard my brothers claimed he said it was great until I learned how to speak, and that was the breaking point.
No, and then this wonderful baby appeared in our house, who I had no idea at the time would come to someday be my co-conspirator on a Robert Putnam documentary. But yeah, we grew up in Falls Church, Virginia. Our father was an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist. And so he was doing a lot of thinking broadly about community, and our mother was a big community practitioner on the ground, who did a lot of community building work in our town. So I think, Pete and I both grew up, I think, with a lot of the themes of this film that we ultimately ended up working on together around us.
I think I realized that y'all two are both in like the family business, as it were.
Yes. No, we joke a lot about that. Yeah. It's like running a deli.
Did you two do a lot of things together growing up, Rebecca? Were you pals?
We did not really, because of this age gap. I mean, Pete, what are some of your early memories?
Well, we ended up, we were just in different life stages until later in life. And then we ended up being kind of the similar type of person in high school, though. I think we both won the Spirit of George Mason Award, which was the name of our high school, because we were which was the award they gave to the person who was most like communal and, contributed most to the common public civic life of the school. And so we kind of had similar spirit of that. And we actually have a very similar thing on, where we followed our parents into our majors in college, where my mom comes from like a long line of politicos and I was a political science major. And then my dad was an anthropologist and Becky was an anthropology major. And in a way, this film is a mix of politics and anthropology, because another way of putting what the film is it's a story about how culture affects politics.
Wow. We definitely need to circle back around to this. The next question I wanted to ask is, I have this very broad way of thinking about what a conversation is. And I say, like, when did the conversation about this project start?
Yeah.
What I'm hearing you say is it started with a couple of ancestors back.
Yes, I think so. And I think also hearing stories growing up about, what our grandparents' day-to-day life was like, and recognizing that those patterns had changed. Our mother's father, our grandfather, for example, was the Democratic committeeman for his town in Riverside, Illinois. And, we heard growing up about how, every 4 years, my mom was one of 7, and 2 of her siblings were born had birthdays in October, and they had to move their birthdays to be celebrated later in the year because the elections happened in November, and it was all hands on deck. My grandmother was hitting the phone tree every night, and, they were getting people out to the polls to vote, block by block.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, maybe let's zoom in then, because, Pete, I know you've written about this and both of you studied this more broadly, but like, when did I think of this, like this movie, like writing a book together or starting a company together. Yeah. It's like that scene in a movie in like The Muppets Take Manhattan, where it's like, let's put on a show.
Yeah.
It's like, so I'm wondering, like, when did that conversation, like, let's do this start? Like,
we were both fans of documentaries. My sister was a video journalist for a decade doing short documentaries. we had like always talked about our favorite documentaries, whether it was like Adam Curtis or Errol Morris or Werner Herzog or, Michael Moore, or all these people. It was
Mhm.
kind of, it was a nice golden age of documentaries as we were coming up. And we wanted to do one together, and we were looking for a topic, and the topic that, my sister was always had the sober reality of everything during this project, where she said, we're going to be working on this for a very long time. This is not a quick project if we're going to do it. So it better
Mm.
be a topic that is really, really, really deep in our hearts, that we think
Mm.
is so important. 10 years from now, it'll still be important. And so, it's not just any passing idea. It has to be something that we want to wake up every day and think about.
Yeah.
And we're now, we chose right, at least on that. I'm very confident we chose right, at least on that quality, because we are now coming up on 2 years since it premiered at a film festival, and we still
Mhm.
want to talk every day about the importance of community in America, the decline of community, and most importantly, how do we turn around that decline to have an upswing of community
Yeah.
engagement in America. So that was kind of the topic that fit the bill.
So if I'm hearing you right, Pete, it's almost like you two wanted to work on a project together, and then this was like, this is the heart of the matter, something you're both really, really passionate about. Did I get that right?
I
Like, we
think
were
so, but
gonna
I
do a
think
big
there
thing
was
together.
also that this topic in particular
Mm.
aligned, and there was kind of a moment where it was a little bit like now or never on this
Mhm.
story. Pete was a student of the main participant in the film, Robert Putnam, and in 2017, Robert Putnam was about to retire from teaching. So it was about
Mhm.
to be his last semester. And so I think, we'd batted around this idea more casually about the possibility of doing a doc together. And I think I was increasingly frustrated by my job in the mainstream media and
Mm.
coming home a lot and complaining probably over holiday dinners about my frustrations and, wanting to work
Mhm.
on something, longer and kind of out of the daily news cycle. But yeah, I think it was really this moment in 2017 when Robert Putnam was about to retire, and it was like, if we're going to approach him about kind of revisiting Bowling Alone, this is really, the moment so we can capture some of this last semester of him teaching, where he was a professor at Harvard at the time.
Yeah. Okay, so there was like a forcing function, and then also this wave of dissatisfaction on your side, Rebecca. Pete, is that how you remember the sort of inciting events
Yeah,
in the
totally.
story of
We
this?
were always talking about things. One of the things that has given momentum and energy to the film is that feeling darkness about what's going on in the country, and then
Yeah.
grasping for something that is one way we can contribute to the light. And the film was always our answer for our way to contribute to the light, which was, oh, well, okay, let's take all this energy of how we're feeling disappointed in what's going on
Mm.
nationally and put it into the film, because that's our contribution to turn this thing around.
Yeah.
And I do remember, a lot of this started with, feeling that there was like a lot of darkness out there. The other was this lens that changes how you see everything. That's a big part of the film, which is, it's not just a story about something that happened. It's not just a story about something that's important. It's a way of seeing,
Mm.
which
Yeah.
is, you can look at a housing complex and you can see it in terms of material. It's made of brick and wood. Or you can term it economically and say, oh, look, here's how rent payments work. Here's how landlords have power. Or all of that very important brick and wood and landlords and power and politics and economy and money. But there's another way you can look at it, which is, this is a social network.
Yeah.
And this is a community, and there are things that come from it being a social network and a community, and we wanted to give people that lens to look at things, because it's very clarifying and oftentimes inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, I mean, it's like the chef who looks at the world through the lens of food. You two, and I think through my own work in dialogue, you start to look at everything from a lens of, well, this is a network of conversations
Yes.
and you were either impeding the flow of conversations
Yeah.
by how we build cities and buildings and organizations, or we make it more possible for those
Yes.
conversations to flow.
And
Yes.
there's a great heritage of this lens, like Jane Jacobs, great hero, you
Yeah.
know, her whole thing was, she opens Death and Life of Great American Cities with sidewalks. And she says, you look at a sidewalk, and a sidewalk in a giant master plan from these big modernist urban designers is a small detail. It's like about, okay, pedestrian traffic or something, but a sidewalk is the site of public life and cultural creation, and the ballet of the city, in the morning where everyone's walking each other. It's the sight of eyes on the street, and so, this, we kind of see Bob's work and what we're trying to do with this film as part of that heritage.
Yeah. Boy, and I'll tell you, I mean, sidewalks, there's a whole story there. I mean, and certainly New York City, where I grew up, the sidewalks have been chipped away at. Mm-hmm. They used to be significantly larger in almost every single avenue. And slowly but surely, the car has taken over the sidewalk. If you look at these like old timey videos of New York, there's almost no distinction between sidewalk and where the horses and early cars were going. It was just a bunch of people just trying to get someplace. And now it's the segregation and the whittling away of, human space for car space.
I'm hopeful it's being clawed back slowly. I've been encouraged by some recent progress on that.
Don't read the New York Post. Okay. Because they complain, like these bike lanes, that's what's causing all the traffic in New York City.
Of course.
So I'll just, pause on my own rant there. I'm really curious, when we talk about building anything, when we talk about finding a partner or to build a company with, people usually use the analogy of getting married. Mm-hmm. It's a long process, 2017 to 2023. Mm-hmm. And now here we are in 2025, like you're still talking about it. You're still working on the movie.
Yeah.
Like it's a long haul. And I'm curious, like, what were some of the hard conversations that you had along the way, and how did you manage that process?
Yeah.
Because conflict is part of doing anything.
Right. I mean, I think some of it is you embark on the journey, and I think this is like all big commitments in life, with some level of naivete that helps you embark on the journey, because you don't realize at the outset maybe how hard it's going to be. I think initially Pete and I thought we were maybe just making a film that would end up on YouTube. It grew to something bigger. It was just going to be a little side project initially. But, as we got deeper and deeper, it kind of took on a life of its own. But like all commitments too, you start them in one version of the world, and you come out in another version of the world. A global pandemic hit in the middle of this one.
Oh, right. That did happen.
Yes. Pete had 2 children in the middle of this one. I moved to another country in the process of doing it, so life is continuing on, as you're doing the project. I think what I'll say is, as far as, kind of the relationship, building in a 2-person team, which is always intense when it's just, 2 people like that. I think we had to kind of acknowledge that there was life being lived outside. And I think it's good and bad that you don't have the same boundaries as you have at work. It was good.
When you're in a family together.
COVID was tough, and there would be days where, many days where I would come on and cry in the middle of our meetings on Zoom. And not all workplaces, I think, are as understanding of bringing that much of your emotional self to your meeting. But when it's your brother, it's a little more understanding. But, you also...
Or sometimes less understanding. I don't know how your family is.
Thankfully more understanding.
That's great.
But then when you need to get to work on doing script edits, you have to learn how to shift gears.
Mode switching. And there's a lot of it which is like you dive off a cliff and you have to actually the best metaphor, I'll not mix metaphors, I'll end that metaphor and say the best metaphor we ever read, I think, was Jad Abumrad saying you walk into a forest and then you have to walk out of the forest. And the thing is, you get to a certain point in the middle of a project where you're in the middle of the forest And there always is a place where you could quit and like tell 100 people that have already bought into this thing that it's over. Like we could have done that, but that seemed really, really out of reach. So you just wake up in the middle of a hard day and you say, we have to figure out how to get out of this forest. And then you get out of the forest. You know, that's the fun thing. Like when you have the energy at the beginning of a project where you're still excited by all the dreams of what it could be, you use that energy to walk in, and then you use the energy of like, we got to figure out how to land this plane, you know, to walk out, you know, or we got to get home, you know, to walk out. And so that's part of it too. And, you know, projects are all the cliches are just true. It's like a journey of 1,000 miles is a collection of steps, you know, single steps. And it's literally, we have a joke on the film, which is like, today is the day when we do X, you know, like, today is the day where we interview our 12th person. You know, today is the day where we find archival material of someone riding a bicycle because the interviewee is talking about bicycles and we need a bicycle to cover that interviewee. You know, today is the day where the fact checker told us everything in our scripts that was actually inaccurate and we need to correct it all. You know? So it's, you know, that's just a collection
but
of.
then there's happy days. You know, today's the day we apply for the Oscars. You know, today is the day we premiere our film.
Yeah, today we literally said that. Like today is the day 100 people are in a room watching our film.
So it's very much like this day one mentality that I've heard bandied around. Like it's kind of celebrating all the steps, celebrating all the moments, and being like, okay, today, yes, these are. It's like the we get to instead of we have to. Small mindset shift. It's interesting because, like, I feel often, you know, we learn how to converse, we learn how to argue and how to repair arguments at the dinner table, and so it's kind of interesting to be talking to two, you know, project leads who share this, you know, family milieu, even though there's this saying that, you know, none of us have the same parents because, you know, Rebecca, you had parents when were you the first?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So they were, you know, they knew less about being parents, but by the time they got to Pete, they knew more. Right. This is, as a second child, Pete and I can agree, like they got some things right. You know, they figured some things out that they worked out some of the kinks on the firstborn, obviously. No, this. I'm getting no facial takeover for you guys. You're like, no, that's not. We've never had this conversation in our family. But it's like, how do you two fight? Do you fight well? I mean, there must have been some fights.
We had to learn how to fight, would you say, Pete, over the course of the project, and how to fight productively, and how to surface, you know, family dynamics that were at play, and confront our own shadows.
This is really
for all the young followers out there. You know, because a lot of times under the surface of our fights, you know, when we were able to get down to the, you know, asking 3 whys level of the fight, a lot of times under there was, you know, I'm feeling condescended to by my older sister, which is, you know, just a very common dynamic. And you know, for me, I had the older sister, you're always so used to getting your way. And, you know, and our fights were more successful when we could identify that was at play and surface
the Freudian, when is a font choice not a font choice? Right. When is a color palette not a color palette? You know? So, which is great. You know, that's the thing. It's like, in the end, there's also just like a level of, you have to make the movie, so you have to make a decision, and there's no process that's a perfect way to make a decision, and so you have to constantly. I actually think my sister's made like a lot more video projects than me, but like in my one experience of making this one feature doc, the one advice I give to other people, like I've heard, like to be a director is to answer 10,000 questions. Like everyone, you build together this amazing team. They bring all their skills to you, but then they come to you with like, do you want X or Y? Do you want Z or A? It's like an optometrist appointment. It's like A or B, B or C, forever, you know, for years.
Yes.
And, you know, there's some of those choices you have to go to the mat for like the creative vision, and other of those choices you have to like, you can't go to the mat every day, and you might be wrong. You have to have humility to like a decision that you like isn't important, you might not know the best answer to, and then you have to have conviction on another decision where it's like, I know for sure this is like the message we're trying to say with this thing. And that it really helped. This is one of the nice things about working with someone coming up in your family is you kind of have similar vibes of what you're like, similar tastes and sensitivities to, and like desires of what you're trying to go for, you know, and there was enough like shared creative vision on that. So, which is nice.
Yeah. There's so many layers here. And one that I think is so interesting is one, the willingness to put the project kind of above, I don't know if there's a triangle here. Hopefully there's a triangle. In a way, it's like we need to make a decision. We need to move the project forward.
Yep.
And then there's how I feel about it.
Yep.
And there's a willingness, I think you were saying, Rebecca, to sort of investigate, why do I feel this way? It's sort of owning I may have my own trigger here.
Yeah.
And I may also have legitimate needs, wants. I may be seeing what I'm really seeing.
Yep.
And then there's like, what hill am I? And my friend Pete, who may never listen to this, but he hates the phrase "die on that hill."
Yeah, yeah.
I try to demilitarize my metaphors in general, but we're kind of talking about that. He's like, pick your battles and say, like,
right,
am I going to fight to tooth and nail for this, or am I going to step away? There is a dance between we've got to move this forward. I recognize my own triggers. I own what I really, really want, and sort of the flow between those things is non-trivial. So good job.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. And I think that was maybe one of the more surprising takeaway. This was the biggest and maybe the biggest project I work on in my life, because it did take 8 years. And I don't know, Daniel, if you felt this in writing your book or other long, ambitious projects. It's something I've felt like a special kinship to other people right now in my life who have gone through a hard thing.
Yeah.
I think I underappreciated how you transform as a person in making art. I feel like I came out of this project a totally different person because of some of the personal growth I had to do to make it happen and to put it out in the world, which was something I think I didn't fully appreciate before taking on something quite so big. A lot of my work previously, it didn't feel as in the realm of art. And I do consider this film art. Prior I was in the news and I was kind of producing, quicker stuff that had to just get out on deadline. But when you're really pouring something in that you can really shape to be, exactly as you're kind of envisioning in your head, you're transformed by that process. Yeah. If you're lucky.
Just to add a quick weird thing to that, there is kind of like a Jungian alchemical heritage to that too, which is the idea of the magnum opus was make this external work, but there's an equal mirrored internal transformation. Like you transform the materials out there into something, and then you're transforming the materials in here into something. And we both feel totally that that's like what happened. Like this was an ordeal in the best sense of the term, a gauntlet, that we went through the process. And
the transformative ordeal is definitely there's a grail on the other side.
Write that book or make that film.
What do you feel like is because then if this is the hero's journey, like we're getting the boon on the other side. Like what is the inner growth that you feel like you two have won in the process of slaying this dragon, completing this project?
You want to take that one first?
Oh man, what a question!
I know.
For listeners, Daniel asked us before this interview, like, do you have any questions you haven't been asked before that are hard? And we were like,
that might be it.
He's really good at it. I would say one is I think there's like a certain creative confidence, like believing in your own vision. I think we have like much more secure confidence and creative vision There's also just like project confidence, which is like, you go out and do a project. It's completely ridiculous to do a project. Like anyone, it's like the world works. It is a status quo. All the machines are going, and you want something totally new in it. And you are the one who should make a film or write a book or change something or create an intervention in your neighborhood or form a new organization. It's always crazy. And there's a lot of messages out there as you're going that are like, this is crazy, this is crazy, this is crazy. And you go through it and it works, or you go through it and it doesn't work, but the sky didn't fall. You suddenly just like loosen the intensity a bit on that.
Yes.
And I think there's like a big thing. I would say a third thing is like, I think we both feel more of a connection that you like do this work. It's not your ego. It's not like this is representative of you. It's like the part that's you was the you that chose to get up every day and do it. Not like if the film is bad, that means you're bad. It's just, or if the film is good, but then here's the most important one. If the film is good, that doesn't mean you're good. It just means you communed with the universe in a way that led to a beautiful thing. And thus you learned a bit about how it's beautiful to commune with the universe. But the most important thing was the fun process of communing, not like proving yourself as worthy in the world. You're already worthy in the world, even if you don't make a film. And so, so I don't know.
That's quite a boon, Pete. That's extraordinary. Beautifully said.
Yeah, and I think for me, one practical thing I'll mention, and then a little, kind of more loftier takeaway is I went into this film in a bad place, mentally and emotionally, about how I was looking out at America. I'd spent, a little over half a decade at NBC News covering national news, and I was covering things like school shootings and the opioid epidemic and suicide, and just talking to a lot of people day in and day out around the country that felt unseen, not understood, forgotten about. And, it takes a toll on you, as we all know, when you take in, a lot of suffering every day. And, as a journalist, I think, some journalists fly off to far-flung places and then come home and have some distance. And for me, I felt my heart breaking for my own country, because it was covering stuff, around me, and that I felt ownership over, being an American and covering America. And so I went into the film wanting to make a positive alternative vision, but not fully sure I believed in it myself, even while I wanted to put out that message. But I did, truly leave. And I feel, even to this day, at this moment, in early February 2025, when we are recording this podcast, I feel hopeful now about the future of America. And I know we aren't hearing that from a lot of people in our mainstream media, but the cool thing that Pete and I got to see as we been touring the film around, and in researching the film and looking at these kind of moments in American history when there have been huge bursts of civic activity, we're in touch with people every day that are doing really cool stuff, all over the place, that's getting, zero coverage in the in the media. Yourself included, Daniel, when I met with, your co-working space in New York City. And I'm like, I'm getting so much hope from, groups of 20 people at a time that are meeting up in rooms all around the US, working on making their communities better. So that's kind of a practical thing. And then, on the larger side, I think looking at a big project from the outside, in some ways I think can be like looking at, a marriage or a long-term relationship when you're younger and don't quite know what that feels like till you're in it, to understand the depth of commitment and the ups and downs that add to the whole of that depth. And I think, working in this project for 8 years, and the good and the bad days, but how year 8 feels different from year 1. You know, that depth has been a big takeaway, and the deep meaning of that, of working on something for a long time and really loving it even when it's hard. Yeah.
And with a project like this, I mean, writing a book, I mean, which Pete, you've done, I think there's this idea that I will be done, but there's the project of continuing to talk about the things that are in the thing, because it's not just like, oh, I built a building and then I walk away and now people live in it.
Yeah.
It's like, well, actually using that analogy, it's like a book is, you want people to come in and to continue to be part of the conversation.
Yes.
And so, congratulations on getting the film onto Netflix. I think I assume that that's a big deal in the filmmaking industry for like an indie doc to like be on Netflix. So congratulations on that. But I notice you're still doing dozens of community screenings. Like I kind of want to just like read. There's so many like lovely. I just want to sort of like imagine what it's like to go to the Mendocino County Library on March 14th and the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and the Greenfield Community College in Greenfield, Mass, which is a lovely town.
Yeah.
And on March 24th, and there's just the Chicago Public Library, like all of these places that are continuing to host the movie and to be part of the conversation. I think the community screening, I don't know if you want to call it a strategy. It seems like it's core to what the message of this film is, but I'm wondering like where it started, and it seems like a hard way to get a movie out there, but also like a very natural way. I just want to unpack that because I think it's just such an amazing project within a project.
Yeah, you know, we don't want anyone watching this film alone. You know, the whole message of the film is one of our most effective questions we've been asking on the tour is, what are things that you do alone that you should be doing together? And one of those is watching documentaries. And so, you know, we really want that. We see it as an organizing tool, not just an organizing tool for us. We see it as an organizing tool for you, you know, like the viewer, you know, use this as an excuse to get a bunch of people together. And then show them why getting a bunch of people together, it's kind of like a funny meta thing. It's like that, get a bunch of people together, they watch it, and then they understand a little bit more about why it was important that they all got together in retrospect. So that's one thing, like very basic stuff. The other thing is like using it as a way to reorient your institution to hone in on the importance of community connection. So we have people that are like wildfire prevention or hospital or government or library or, you know, urban planners, that teachers that are watching the film and then starting conversations, not necessarily on our main mass shtick of like join a club, but actually like how can our institution be more communal and promote the rejuvenation of community and civic life. So that's been exciting too. And that stuff happens in the interaction of real people in groups. You know, I've been really taken by this idea, you know, going to the movie is part of the movie. You know, I think it's a Seinfeld joke, which is like the popcorn is part of the movie, driving there is part of the movie, walking out and hearing all the people have the conversation afterwards, being like, did you like that scene? I didn't like that scene. I can't believe that character died. That's part of the movie. Now, what does he mean?
Spoiler alerts, Pete. No,
preparing.
No one dies.
Our grandmother.
The only thing at threat of dying is our democracy.
But like, War's about a movie. But the point of the idea is like preparing the house for a party is part of a party. You know, cleaning up after the party is part of the party. And this is one of the deep communitarian ideas. Getting together is not an efficient necessity to get to some other goal. It itself is part of the stuff of life.
Yes.
And like,
you know, and our great religions know that. You know, that's why so much of kind of cleaning and preparation, you know, is part of, you know, all of our great religious doctrines. And I think that's the level of spirituality, you know, we want to bring to our community life, you know, again, even if it's, you know, in a non, you know, explicitly kind of religious as we're used to thinking of it way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, more in the brass tacks arena, like, do you think this movie would have made it to where it's made it without the community strategy?
I don't know, actually. And, it's hard to say if we would have gotten it on Netflix without that, because we actually premiered at South by Southwest and did not get our Netflix deal for a full year after that.
Mm,
And Pete and I made a decision after it had its premiere at Netflix and had been shown out in the world at that point that we weren't going to sit on it and wait. And so we did start
mm,
that community tour right away, and um, and tried to start building kind of interest and buzz through this community screening model.
mm,
And then I think, on the flip side of that now, it did go up on Netflix in October of last year, and we weren't sure if the interest in the community tour would fall off after it was more easily accessible. But we've been encouraged to see, I think our requests have maybe doubled in pace since it ended up on Netflix. And I think that shows that people are hungry for an excuse to get together and
mm,
hungry for this conversation, and they're hungry for having it together.
yeah.
And so, we're trying to continue this tour as long as we can and just go 25 people at a time in rooms around the country. And
Are you showing up to, I mean, because when we got, I
mhm.
mean, I think maybe it was like 50 folks. Y'all were kind enough. I mean, we found the resources to bring you all on Zoom.
Yeah.
How many of these are you showing up at?
Yeah, so in person, we go to maybe 10%, I would say. So
Mm-hmm.
Pete and I are both, in the kind of Washington, D.C. area. So, if they're close by or an easy train up to New York, or groups as they're, willing to fly us out places.
Yeah.
But I would say, and then we join another handful kind of over Zoom as there's interest in bringing us on virtually. But I would say the majority, we are not attending. And I always tell groups as they're booking screenings with us, I love that too. Even when good groups don't want to bring us, get your mayor up on
Mm,
stage after, get your president of the Rotary Club. They're going to be able to
yeah.
tell you, what's going on in Petaluma, a lot better than Pete and I in the conversation. Or, break your group, into small groups to have conversations, 3 or 4
Yeah.
at a time. And, I think we also say about the film, we hope it asks as many questions as it answers. Like, we want it to bring up a lot of questions and thoughts for people
Yeah.
to kind of explore. And where they're going to end up with those answers is going to be different in Vermont than it is in Seattle, than it is in Florida. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the topic is something that all of us have insight into, which is fun. Like probably
Yeah.
the leading expert on community in America is unknown, right now, because they're probably someone who is like running a neighborhood association in the middle of some random neighborhood everywhere. And they took the most insular, divided neighborhood and figured out a way to mix food and, art and whatever, and got them together, and no one knows about them, and that's what's
Yeah.
fun is like all of these people, you could do a Q&A with any 3 people that show up. That's like, what does community mean to you? How have ways you've brought people together? How do you gather across divides? And so that's why we like, what comes out of these communal entity, communal screenings, not necessarily everyone looking at us. Like, you've heard enough of me with my narration of the film.
Right. I mean, and this is, when I reflected on the gathering that I hosted at Fabric, I feel like because we had the two of you on Zoom and we wanted to like squeeze all the extra wisdom we could, I feel like for me personally, I tried to, before the film started, to connect people, to have them get into pairs and to spark some conversation. But what I heard afterwards was, and I'm not surprised at this, is that people were ravenous to continue the
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
conversation. And you've been to some of these, you've watched some of them. I'm wondering what you think best practices are. I feel like gathering is non-trivial. It is hard to do well. And, I'm a semi-pro at it. And I feel like I still did not give people the full satisfaction of connecting in the way that they wanted to connect. So I'm curious, what have you seen that people are out there doing when they bring people together around the movie that is just chef's kiss? You're like, this is how to do it right.
Yeah, so one model we've been using is pairing the film with joining fairs. So we tell groups to host the film and then maybe invite 10 organizations from town to table outside, the
Oh
way you
my
would have
God,
had
that's
in college or
awesome.
high school. And we've loved that model because people can come right out of the theater, and
Mm-hmm.
the Rotary Club or the hospital who needs volunteers, or the library's book club or a running club are
Mm-hmm.
right there ready. After they are hopefully leaving the film feeling fired up to join and do something,
Yeah.
ready there to kind of capture emails, which is a good organizing practice, get people's contact info and follow up with them. So that's one model that we've been seeing a lot of
Mm.
success with. Pete,
Joining fairs. I
other
love that
thoughts?
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also it kind of depends on if the goal is just kind of generally promoting the spirit of joining, which joining fairs are great for that, or just bringing up different people to talk about their joining experiences. The other is this kind of
Mm-hmm.
reorienting institutions to get excited about this, and one of that is like having good conversations afterwards, like you know
Mm-hmm.
how can our school, what are points in our school where we are could contribute to community revitalization, what are points in our hospital where we can do that, and you watch the film to get the juices flowing, and then people start sharing
Yes.
ideas of what can be done.
This is a nice little like micro segue, because I remember I was sitting at a coffee shop last summer. My wife and I were wound up chit chatting with this young lady who was a teacher, and I don't know how it came up, but I was fired up about Join or Die because I think we'd just watched it, and she'd never heard of. She'd like, oh wait, I think I've heard of Bowling Alone. Oh yeah, Bridging Capital. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And she and her brother worked on the marching band in
Oh,
school.
Oh
lovely.
wow, okay,
And
great.
she suddenly realized that marching band
Yeah.
was a vector of bridging capital. And just by renaming what it is that she was doing, it's no longer just marching band.
Yes.
It's, juniors and seniors and sophomore and freshman students have a shared ground, a shared interface for dialogue about something that they all love. This is bridging
Yes.
capital at
Yes.
Yeah,
work.
Yes.
yeah,
It's an
Yeah.
amazing reframe.
yeah, and
And
this.
I feel like sorry, go ahead, please.
Oh yeah, go.
Riff.
Sorry. Well, this is the
No, I
thing.
tend to
It's like
ask questions that are
why
way, way too long and multi-nested. So I'll just
there are
pause.
there are these wonderful institutions everywhere that were never started to do X, Y, or Z, but embedded in
Mm-hmm.
them is this resource. And one of our hopes is that can help us make decisions about keeping things or building on things or things like that. So one of is, we already have, all the kids have individual music lessons. We don't need a marching band anymore. Well,
Right.
if you know about bridging social capital and you know that the marching band is there, well, that might be a reason to keep the marching band. One of my favorite examples in this in
Yeah.
school of how like the social capital lens helps you make decisions is, a lot of schools are moving to ban cell phones. And some of them
Mm,
do the half measure where they say, we're going to ban it in the classroom, but we'll allow it at lunch and in the hallways and at extracurricular activities. And you ask them, well, why do you ban it in the classroom and not ban it at the classroom's where the real learning is happening. The other stuff
mm,
doesn't matter. And you're like, wait, with the social capital lens, the hallways, the lunch, and the extracurricular activities
mm-hmm.
are the most important learning that's happening at school. School is
Yeah.
just a bunch of classes that are excuses to get you there so you can spend time at lunch in the hallway and at extracurricular activities where the most important thing is learn. Sorry, I know I'm going too far on that, but
No,
with
no, no. I mean, but that's a lens
Or at
on
least
school. Like,
as
we're here
important,
to
at
learn
least
how
as
to
important.
be with each other.
learn how to
Yeah.
be with each other. So if you think cell phones are a poison to a place for kids, definitely ban it in the lunch, and that was
Yeah.
important learning's happening there. That curriculum
Yeah.
is just as important as math and science and English and the like.
Yeah. The lens of social capital really does change how you see the world. I'm curious. I have like two more big questions, and one's for you, Rebecca, and the other one's for you, Pete. But so, Rebecca, you and I met at this super like serendipitous and random
Yeah.
gathering of gatherers. That was May. I was looking at my calendar, May of 2023. So like
Wow. Yeah.
I remember watching the trailer and being like, it's nuts. What I think was really interesting about that gathering is that
Yeah.
we were putatively supposed to talk about the future of gathering.
Yeah.
But when you get a bunch of gatherers together, what we wound up talking about is how hard it
Yes.
is to be gatherers and to create sustainable models for gathering.
Mhm.
Casper Takul, who, Pete was
Yeah.
there, like, who's constantly innovating new models, sustainable financial models for gathering people in unique and interesting ways. I'm wondering if now you, Rebecca, and obviously Pete, you can chime in on this. Like, if you have a point of view on the future of gathering and what we can do. This was the question I asked you
Hmm.
at our screening, which I'm still hungry for myself as a gatherer. What can we do to make it easier for gatherers to do the work of gathering? Because the movie's about joining, but there's
Yeah.
this supposition that there's all these people who are
Hmm.
dedicated to creating
Yeah.
things for people to join.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think you bring up. We spent a lot of time talking about the barriers, and I do think that is where a lot of conversations need to start. Even as we try to go, pie in the sky, build a community third space on every block, or let's start kind of sharing resources. But yeah, and I think we need to look at, yeah, what are those barriers? The thing we hear a lot as we're touring this film, and as Eddie Glaude and Jade McAleva in our film speak to, is people are really tired. They're working really hard. They're, caring for family members, with health
Hmm.
problems. They're caring for children. And um, the data backs it up. We are, in policy, we are not a country that has a ton of support for families.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think we do need to look at those barriers very seriously. As far as, hours that we're working in the office and what support, so how do we cut back on that so we have more free time to do this work
Yeah.
if we're going to decide as a culture it's important for, our democracy and our economy and our physical and mental health. Um, and we need to create more policies to make it easier for
Hmm.
families to gather. But then while we're waiting for that to happen, how do we start moving in the direction of building more, even as we're pushing for those changes? And as we have higher social capital, we're going to get to those changes faster because we're going to have more people to kind of push together with. But I think it's this thing that Pete mentioned earlier that we've been saying a lot in the tour is asking yourself a simple question if it feels like a big barrier, which is this: what am I doing alone that I could be doing together?
Hmm.
If it's childcare that you're doing alone, can you start a childcare cooperative so that
Hmm.
can you know take off some of the load of caring for children, every single day? If you're cooking dinner alone every night, can we start cooking more communally? If you're, walking or running alone, we've seen a huge rise in, athletic clubs, and, that's a way we can get our exercise in, but also be building our social capital and making connections. And for some people, meeting life partners. So, you can kill two birds with one stone at these community events. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I think, everyone can kind of do a life assessment of, what are all the activities I do right now? Okay, what of these could be converted into a group activity?
Hmm. Yeah. It's a wonderful invitation to one. And I've been thinking about a cooking club because I remember reading about these, just big kitchens where I'm big into bulk cooking, and
Yeah,
I think I
yeah.
can easily make 3 times the amount of soup that I need.
Right,
In
right.
fact, my wife accuses me of doing this regularly. That's of course what the freezer is for.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, Pete, I feel like I would be remiss if I did not talk about your book,
Yeah.
Dedicated, and this concept of liquid modernity, which you introduced me to through your work. There was an Atlantic article that y'all probably read about the lonely century,
Yep.
and they cite some really interesting research in it, which I've been trying to remind myself of. There's this research that if you ask somebody if they're going to enjoy their commute more, listening to a podcast or reading their paper or talking to a stranger, the answer is like really easy. People are like, oh, obviously I'm going to enjoy my we do a hell of a lot more if I'm just minding my own damn business, because that's what we do here. But it's very reproducible result that we actually have a better time if we talk to a stranger. Yeah. Now, like, I have experienced immense resistance to going to a networking gathering or a thing, and people love to cancel. We love to stay at home. We love it when someone cancels on us. And it feels so good to, like, we can just do everything we want to do at home. It's easy. I can order in food. I have total control. And I mean, why is it important for us, Pete, to coach ourselves to resist this force in our brains that tells us, don't go? Why is it important for us to say, no, I committed to this and I'm going to commit to this?
Yeah. A few things on this. One is that I really don't want civics to be like eat your broccoli or finger wagging moralism.
Hey, I love broccoli. Let's just be clear.
Like, here's why eating your broccoli is important for you.
Fair.
And that gets into a question of civic opportunity. The great political scientist Hari Hahn has the civic opportunity index, which is like, how many people even have opportunities to join things? Like, why are we putting it on the individual to figure out how to be communal? Like, the way we were communal in a previous time was there were a lot of opportunities to be communal. So one aspect of this is I just think we need a flourishing of all different types of communal interactions. And the people that are heroes of this are the civic creators and the civic leaders who stick their neck out to create the pickleball league or the neighborhood association or the annual potluck or something like this. Or whoever wants to invent a metro car where it's normaler to talk to each other or something.
The talking car. That's actually a great idea.
Yeah,
we have a quiet car.
There's a quiet car. We need a talking car.
We need a talking
the Kibitz car.
And so that's one thing. But okay, so now for the individual, we're born in the place we are with the level of social capital we have, and like, why should you go out and do something? The thing is, I love the old wisdom of, I think that our mom and grandma used to say this. It's like, exactly what your life is going to be if you stay home. And it'll be the same thing every day if you do that and stay home every day. The joy of life is in the serendipity and mystery of what happens if you go out. You don't know. You have to let go of a little bit of control. And out of that, some of it might be misses. You might go to the first club meeting and you're like, these are not my people at all. Or, that's that neighbor, I'm going to keep them at a little bit of a distance. But the vast majority of times, it's you're delighted by something or something connects or you add more material to your life. I don't know the causal mechanism of this, but I see the reality, which is there's a weird thing that happens. The more communal people are, the more communal people are. The people that are part of 5 clubs end up being part of 15 clubs. The people that have time for checking in on every single neighbor in one street in the neighborhood have time to check in on everyone on the next street in the neighborhood. I don't know how that works. Like, I have some guesses at it, but I know it's true, which is that somehow there's something about our time, our energy, our sense of meaning and purpose that just grows bigger and bigger and bigger as you get more material into your life. We had this amazing family friend who was my sister's godfather, Ken Brecker, and he did like 1,000 different things in his life. He was starting plays and he was traveling around and he was on the library foundation and he was everything. And somehow he didn't ever feel this energy of I'm totally stuffed. There's too many things. And yet the people that are part of nothing sometimes feel, oh gosh, life is way too busy. And so none of this is judgment. It's just, there is some magic that happens with opening up your heart to the material of the world. And it somehow finds more and more space and more energy. And if I had to guess the mechanism, it's like the energy that we have for the world is somehow connected to the feeling of like whether like other people are part of our purpose. And like, there's something that gets easier when you're open to other people. There's something that gives you more life, that makes you feel like you have more time. There's something about being with other people that makes you feel like something, that there's more space. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We've also been talking a little bit, as we're meeting with different communities to ask ourselves, where in our modern life are we, taking convenience but sacrificing community? I think of growing up, we were always getting, rides to the airport. Um, it's a little strange now, to
Mm,
be honest, to ask a friend for a ride, when there is Uber and Lyft. I also heard recently there's Uber Teen, which I see the need
mm,
where parents can kind of call an Uber for a kid to pick them up for soccer practice. And I want to acknowledge that parents are maybe stretched thin, and they need that extra help from a company, but I think we should be investigating all of these choices. That's a missed opportunity for that kid to connect with a neighbor doing a favor for you, and going to pick up that kid. Or for example, in New York City, I used to live in New York. I never had laundry in my apartment. So I always, had to either walk to the laundromat or go to a shared laundry room in a basement where I would maybe run
hmm
into an older neighbor who I wouldn't have crossed paths with usually in my social circle, but could get to know them. It was a little more
Yeah.
inconvenient that I had to drag my laundry somewhere, but there were all these opportunities for community building that I was taking for granted, that, when you get into a building that is maybe convenient because it has all the amenities, you might be losing some of those opportunities. So that's
Yeah.
another place to kind of look at.
No, it's like, obviously I love having a washer and dryer in my house because I can just take off what I'm wearing and put it
Right.
directly in there.
Yep.
It, but in a way, there's this quote from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance that it's always stayed with me, that analytical thought is like a knife, and when we cut with
Hmm.
that analytical thought, something is
Yes.
gained, but something is lost.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
seeing now that in a way, convenience
Yes.
gives us these boons of, oh, I don't have to do this anymore. I gain all this time back to do
Yes.
other things. But it's
Yep.
just like television. We're not actually, there seems to be an incredibly elastic amount of time we can give to TikTok and Instagram and
Yes.
Netflix, where it's just
Yeah.
all
10,
garbage,
10 hours a
um,
day,
10
according to
hours a
the last
day.
Nielsen data on.
And in a way, what Pete, you're suggesting is that, like, once we commit to other people, there's an elasticism that can
Mm,
happen because once we make space for that, there's more space for that.
yep.
Yeah.
And to really treat these moments in our lives that seem like they're nothing as they are opportunities.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, ask for directions instead of opening up your Google Maps next time, and it's a chance to meet the local business on the corner, pop in and ask them how to get
Mm,
somewhere. A totally lost art.
There's a
for
great,
sure.
L.M. Sakassis, the great tech theorist and often critic. He asks the great thought experiment question: what if you fully optimized your life? Okay, and it's very haunting. He goes, imagine all of the inconveniences were gone. It's fully optimized. Nothing is inconvenient. Is that a utopian novel or a dystopian novel?
Right.
And everything was brought to you. There was never a moment you weren't entertained. There was never a moment of uncertainty, a lack of control. I'm like, that's a horror movie. And he
Yeah.
goes,
That it
so
does sound like a Black Mirror episode. Yeah.
also a totally inconvenient Kafkaesque life is also a horror movie. So we just know it's somewhere in between total inconvenience and total convenience. I just know it's not all the way on either of those ends. So we got to find that
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where a good life is.
Yeah.
I feel like our time together is running short, which is shocking. I appreciate all the stuff that we have covered. Um, One question that my wife and I were talking about this morning, and we mentioned bridging capital, but I think it's important to come back to this question of, like, where we can be finding more of it, because it seems like, especially across political divide,
Hmm.
it is so hard to do. And I'm not sure if it seems like there's at least uh, two strategies. One is like, I'm in a knitting club and just hope that someone in there happens to have some significant political difference than me. And then we get to talk about that while having something that we do
Yeah.
have in common, right? Like, I feel like the myth of the magical myth of bridging capital is that like, oh, because I bowl with someone
Yeah.
and I knit or I'm on the PTA, I have enough glue that we can talk about other hard things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is like, oh, direct, maybe more direct bridging capital, like where we're just going to bring together people across these divides to talk about political issues
Mm-hmm.
specifically, which is very on the nose and a little bit hard. And I mean, so
Yeah.
specifically in terms of,
Yeah.
bridging political divide,
Mm-hmm.
Bridging,
that.
yeah. So, one way to see this is a bridging relationship is just a bonding relationship about something else. Because no one really goes into you only connect over things that something you find in common. And so a bridging across the economic divide by sharing a religious divide, or bridging across the ethnic divide by sharing an economic connection, or bridging across the political divide by sharing an interest in like swimming or something. So what we need is a multiplicity of bonding. And then in many ways, I see this as like an anti-monopoly project, which is one type of divide has monopolized like so many other types of divides, or so many other types of areas. Like we here on our tour, I was in a Lions Club and now it's like ripped apart by national politics, but that's not what the Lions Club is about. Or I was in the VFW or something.
Mm-hmm.
And what we need,
or more often people are in nothing, and the one identity, air quotes, that they feel is their political team that they're on.
Right.
But more often than not, these are people that feel that identity from what they're consuming on the internet or on TV, and not necessarily because they've been going to a local meeting or chapter, for that.
Totally. And these things, what you do to prevent them from being cannibalized and monopolized by the large divide, the great tribe, like red team, blue team divide, is you have to have them have a center of gravity of their own mission and purpose, and let that like compel people. Like our goal here is to play pickleball and connect with each other. Sometimes I'm not on team like everything needs to be apolitical. Sometimes that might involve politics, but we can't let it always involve politics. We need to remember our mission here. This is what we do. This is what we do over here. This is what we do over here. Even parties, in a Democratic chapter meeting, what we do is enforce the political divide, but we're going to connect over everything else and not get into our other divides here. So everything has its own thing, and you want a multiplicity. Like, I was seeing recently, like Kendrick Lamar had his Super Bowl halftime show. It is for his own purposes. I'm not one to read what it's about. It's probably, a lot about, the Black cultural experience. It's about Los Angeles. It's about all these things. And I was seeing all these people about the meaning of hip hop. But I've been seeing all these people say, like, was that a pro-Trump or an anti-Trump, thing? And it's like, well, we got to let things be their thing, so that there's multiple different, we want a multipolar civic life, so that, and not let everything get sucked into this. And that's what we want with literal civic groups too. So, I don't know, anything you want to add on that, Rebecca?
Yeah, and I think, we've also been saying, I think there has been, as the political divides have deepened, a lot of talk about, we need more of these bridging groups, as you mentioned. But, I think in strengthening our bonding, which also is in desperate need of attention, our bonding social capital, so our meeting up with people like us, we're going to just automatically get better at bridging, while acknowledging there are certain areas that will require, really focused work. But, the things we learn in our bonding groups is how to approach a stranger at a meeting and introduce ourselves, and wear a name tag, how to publicly speak, how to have a disagreement, even if that disagreement's with people that are like you, about who you want to cater the event or whatever trivial thing is, but you're still learning how to kind of work out those differences. And I think those skills are not being practiced anywhere right now, as our joining numbers are so low. And so if we can be doing skill building, even among bonding groups, when we go out and do need to disagree over, bigger things, or do need to public speak over, larger things, those skills, will be much more advanced if we've had time to kind of practice them, because no one's born knowing how to do this stuff. Yeah.
Yes, that is true. That actually feels like maybe there's a moment to talk a little bit about The Upswing, which I must confess I have not read, but I was sort of encouraged that, I mean, Robert Putnam obviously had this opportunity many decades ago to bring this to the attention of the government. We were not able to, I don't know,
Yeah.
listen to him well enough. And it seems like maybe there's an opportunity through the work of this movie. And, I don't know if there's other trends that you're noticing, but like what is the message that we should be taking from Robert's newest work and from you guys in terms of like a hopeful future for a multi-gathering, a joining of all type of society, which is where we were, 50 years
Yeah.
ago, 60 years ago.
Yeah, the biggest message of The Upswing, I don't want to put words in Bob's mouth, but our read of it is we've done it before and we can do it again. There have been times where we've had very low low social capital and challenging times in civic life. He points to the point at the turn of the 20th century. And then you have an awakening. It starts with a moral and cultural awakening, then it becomes an economic, civic, and social and political awakening. And it comes with a lot of civic creativity. It comes with a lot of what's called democratic experimentalism, a lot of experiments. It comes with a transformation, like we were saying about our own project, people creating things and then transforming how they are as people, and having a different sense of what it means to be an American or what the purpose of our lives are. It comes with a lot of institutional boundary crossing where interesting new institutions are created in surprising places where and we did it before. That led to a golden age of civics at the mid-century, and I think we can do it again. So that's the hope. This isn't a special time. It's a time that is part of some of these cycles, and we can decide to change it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think, from someone coming from a media background, I think I especially appreciated that about Bob's work, because I think we love running the article about, what's happening in Sweden and these Scandinavian countries where they have, high, happiness or this thing worked over here in Japan, and, look at this kind of cool social experiment. But it's easy when it's somewhere else to say, oh, that can happen there because of the dynamics of that culture. That's different than kind of the particular challenges we might face in America. And the thing I loved about, this work that Bob looks at in The Upswing is he's looking back, on ourselves here in America, but from, another moment in our past, which I think makes a strong argument. That we have done it here before, and so this isn't something new, and we've been up against similar kind of forces economically, and what people did to fight those forces economically. Then was not get on Facebook. I didn't have it then, but it was not to sit at home. I will say, it was to get out of the house. It was to get together. It was to get organized. It was to talk to your coworkers, about what you don't like in the workplace. It was to talk to your neighbors about what you didn't like, going on in your neighborhood if the kids weren't being educated, and they got together and started public libraries and started the high school system, and transformed our workplaces, which transformed our economy. So there are a lot of lessons to be taken there. And then obviously, we're always careful to note, and we need to do it better than they did, to make sure that it's being done in a more just way, acknowledging the kind of our racist and sexist past in this country where we want to be pushing further.
Yeah. The odd fellows can't just be fellows anymore.
Right. Right.
The inclusive fellow. Well, good God, this is such an important topic. I feel when you talk about The Upswing and the hope that it feels, there's a feeling in my chest. I don't know exactly what to describe. Maybe it's hope. But it's a really beautiful message that you two are bringing. I really appreciate you being these harbingers of hope. Is there anything that I have not asked you that you feel like I ought to have asked you, or any parting message that we should unpack before we close up shop?
Our parting message is always just join a club. I don't know if you need anything else. Yeah, or if you're in one, make sure you get to that meeting.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Pete's frozen, so he can't.
Yeah, he's been having some internet issues on this one.
I'm back.
Oh, there you are, Pete. Party messages beyond join a club. Get to your meetings.
Yeah, I would just say, the same question we raised earlier, which is, what are things, really think about that. What are things you're doing alone that you could be doing together? And, I'll add this, something that gives me hope anytime I'm down on what's going on nationally in this country, and the feeling that like the world we want is very far away. I really believe, and one of the things we tried to highlight in the film was that the world we want already exists in piecemeal, scattered across thousands of experiments all across the country. Like there are people already doing a part of the dream that we're all seeking somewhere. And so our goal is to just multiply those experiments, grow them, foster them, cultivate them into a larger whole. And so you go to any of these corners where that little piece of hope is, and you're totally filled up and you can see it. You can see the vision of a better future. We just got to bring those all together and keep blowing on those sparks.
Which is some of the work of this movie. And so obviously everyone listening should go to joinordiefilm.com. And I feel like hosting a screening is another call to action. Bring your people together to watch this movie and to have the conversation about what can we join and how can we create things for people to join. Amen. And also just to see that hopeful work of all these people who are trying to experiment and innovate with bringing people together in new and powerful ways, whether it's, Black cyclists or something else, or whatever it is.
Yep.
Well, then I will thank you. Is there any place else you'd like people to visit? I think joinordiefilm.com is probably that's it. That's it. Yeah. That's where the journey should start, and it should not be where the journey ends.
Yeah.
Well, then I will say thank you so much for your generosity and for the work, for your magnum opus and all the dragons you slayed along the way, both in yourself and in the world.
Thank you.
To make this happen.
Thank you. Today was the day we're on Daniel Stillman's podcast.
Check. Well, then I can call scene, I guess.
Great.
Wonderful.
Daniel, thank you for your time. That was a lovely chat. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.